In the grand, velvet black theater of the Milky Way, where ancient civilizations plotted their symphonies of power across millennia, humanity was not considered a threat. They were a curiosity. A young, noisy, fractious species that had somehow stumbled out of its cradle too fast, armed with quaint weapons and grand, fragile dreams. The Galactic Conclave, an alliance of 5 venerable empires that had shaped the fate of stars for eons, watched with detached amusement. When humanity, in its desperate scramble for resources, accidentally damaged a conclave relic world during a mining operation, the ancient powers did not see a declaration of war. They saw an opportunity for a lesson. A clean, clinical, and utterly final demonstration of why the universe has a pecking order. They would erase humanity, not out of hatred, but out of bureaucratic convenience, a minor pest control operation on a galactic scale. They did not understand that in their effort to prune a weed, they were striking a match in a forest they never realized was made of gunpowder. They sought to teach humanity its place. Instead, humanity would show them their grave. Part 1. The Chamber of the Galactic Conclave was a monument to silent power. Light did not shine here, it was woven, drawn from captive stars and spun into delicate lattices that hummed with the weight of history. The air itself was thick with the scent of ozone and antiquity. Representatives of the 5 ruling species, the lithic, slow-blinking Vel, the ethereal, light-drifting Lumine, the calculating, multi-limbed Credar, the hive-minded, chittering Xax, and the amphibious, stoic Gruul hovered or stood in their appointed places. Before them, a holographic display replayed the incident for the 17th time. A human asteroid mining vessel, the KSV Frontier's Hope, using a crude gravitic shear, had misjudged its trajectory. The resulting cascade of debris had scarred the silent, museum world of Velashara, pockmarking a continent-sized monument to a forgotten progenitor race. The damage is minimal. Aesthetically regrettable, but structurally insignificant, droned the Vel ambassador, its voice like grinding stones. The transgression, however, is absolute. Their technology is a klaxon of ignorance. Their presence, a discordant note in the galactic harmony. They operate on chaos. They must be tuned to silence. There was no vote. Merely a consensus that settled over the room like frost. The humans had been offered associate membership a century prior, contingent on adopting conclave technological and social paradigms, a unified government, controlled population growth, and the abandonment of what the Lumine called dangerous individuation. Humanity, in its typical fragmented fashion, had largely ignored the offer, its nation-states and corporate entities bickering and innovating and expanding on their own chaotic terms. The conclave saw not vibrant diversity, but a fatal flaw. The decision was a formality, a coordinated, multi-front military action to dismantle human infrastructure, decapitate their leadership, and scatter their populations. It was not war. It was gardening. The attack, when it came, was a masterpiece of horrific precision. It began not with explosions, but with silence. Conclave silencer vessels, sleek as obsidian knives, slipped into human space and deployed their primary weapon, the stasis web. At its touch, faster than light travel ceased. Subspace communication dissolved into static. The neural nets linking humanity's colonies froze solid. In a single, coordinated moment, the vibrant, noisy tapestry of human civilization was unthreaded. Isolated. Each system, each world, became a lonely island in a suddenly darkened, endless sea. On Earth, the shock was existential. The global net, the lifeblood of the 23rd century, went dead. Starships in transit were stranded, becoming tombs or arcs depending on their supplies. Panic was instant, but it was a panic filtered through a species that had spent its entire history preparing for scenarios that never happened. Contingency plans, buried in the archives of paranoid generals and survivalist cults, were suddenly priceless. Old, hardline national militaries, long since integrated into the global defense force, found their ancient chain of command protocols were the only ones still functioning on a planetary scale. A signal, broadcast on an archaic modulated radio frequency from a bunker deep under the Alps, crackled to life. This is Olympus Actual. Execute Protocol Stonewall. I repeat, all commands, execute Protocol Stonewall. The sky has fallen. Time to become the mountains. And humanity, faced not with a battle but with an erasure, began to do what it did best when cornered. It adapted, and it remembered. On Mars, engineers who could no longer control the planet-wide atmospheric processors used mining charges to blow them into permanent, stable cycles. On the Jovian orbital platforms, astrophysicists turned their telescopes into weapons, calculating how to use the conclave's own energy signatures to blind their sensors. In the asteroid belts, scavenger crews on doomed ships began the frantic work of ripping out FTL drives and building something new, something the conclave's clean technology wouldn't recognize: crude, overpowered, short-range jump engines that fed on radiation and spat out enough gravitational noise to mimic a small supernova. The conclave had aimed to cut off the head. They didn't realize the human body could fight with every single cell. Part 2. The conclave's second phase was the surgical strike. Having severed humanity's connections, they now moved to remove its vital organs. World ships, vast as continents, entered the Sol system. Their targets were clear: Earth's industrial hubs, the shipyards over Mars, the research colonies on Europa. Their weapons were elegant gravity pulses that folded cities into perfect geometric cubes, energy drains that siphoned the power from entire grids, leaving populations to freeze in the dark, nanite swarms that disassembled battle fleets molecule by molecule. It was a display of power meant to be witnessed, a lesson in futility. The lesson, however, was not learned as intended. At the Battle of the Martian Ring, conclave destroyers approached the skeletal remains of the GDF's Fifth Fleet, expecting surrender or a futile last stand. Instead, the derelict human ships detonated in a sequence of precisely timed nuclear explosions. But these were no ordinary bombs. They were vortex charges, a desperate innovation born in the smelters of the belt. The blasts ripped temporary, unstable holes in the local fabric of spacetime. The conclave ships, reliant on perfect gravitational mapping for their shields and navigation, were sent spiraling, their systems catastrophically scrambled. 3 destroyers collided with the wreckage they had come to collect. The humans had turned their own corpses into a weaponized labyrinth. On Earth, the war was fought in the mud and the blood. Conclave ground forces, the biomechanical shock troops of the XIX, descended upon the megacities. They expected terror, collapse, easy harvesting. They encountered something else: a fractal, chaotic, and vicious resistance. There was no central command to decapitate. Instead, every city block became a sovereign nation at war. Grandmothers with antique electronic knowledge jury-rigged power grids to deliver citywide electrocutions. Gangs of street children used augmented reality gaming tech to coordinate ambushes with chemical explosives. University biologists released tailored plagues into the ventilation systems of XIX landing craft, harmless to humans, catastrophic to the hive's shared biochemistry. The conclave watched, first with annoyance, then with dawning confusion. Their casualty projections, calculated to the 10th decimal place, were absurdly, violently wrong. A human would charge a 19 warrior not with a plasma rifle, but with a makeshift spear tipped with superconductive ceramic, aiming to short-circuit its neural interface. A squad would let themselves be captured, only to reveal they were carrying crude but effective electromagnetic pulse bombs sewn into their own bodies. The humans fought with time, a resource the conclave had never considered a weapon. They sacrificed the present with a horrifying willingness to buy minutes, hours, days for someone else, somewhere else, to build or plan or run. Most baffling of all was the noise. As the stasis web choked off normal channels, humanity reverted to a million old ways. Radio towers built centuries ago crackled back to life, broadcasting not just tactical data but music, speeches, stories, and sheer, profane defiance. The signals were weak, chaotic, and filled the silent frequencies with what the Lumine perceived as a form of insanity. This noise was a virus of morale, a proof of life, and a coordination tool all in one. A conclave analysis drone finally decoded a recurring, powerful signal emanating from a point in the Rocky Mountains. It was not a military code. It was a raw audio file of a human female voice singing an ancient Terran song of resilience, punctuated by the coordinates for a 19 landing zone and the chemical formula for a potent acid. The conclave's clean, silent war was becoming very, very dirty, and very, very loud. Part 3. Frustration was a novel and unpleasant sensation for the Galactic Conclave. Their victory was assured by every metric of physics, logistics, and sheer scale. Yet, the human problem persisted, not as an organized military force, but as a galactic scale infection. It was time for a new strategy. The Creedar, masters of logic and societal engineering, proposed the pacification vector. Instead of destroying human worlds, they would be corrected. Using captured genetic material and sociological data from early observations, the Conclave crafted a bioweapon. But this was not a plague of death. It was a plague of peace. The vector, when released into a planetary biosphere, would subtly alter human neurochemistry. Aggression, ambition, territoriality, and creativity, the traits the Conclave deemed destabilizing, would be suppressed. Empathy and communal harmony would be enhanced to a passive extreme. Humanity would become a docile, content, and ultimately stagnant species, tending its gardens under Conclave stewardship. The vector was deployed on Proxima Centauri b, a thriving, vibrant colony of nearly 1 billion. The Conclave fleet watched from orbit, expecting the fierce resistance to melt away into placid acceptance. For a week, it seemed to work. Communications from the surface grew calm, then sparse, then silent. Satisfied, the Conclave prepared a landing party to welcome their new, placid wards. What they found was not a planet of serene humans. They found a graveyard. The first teams landed in New Arcadia, the capital. The streets were immaculate. The people were peaceful, smiling, and utterly catatonic. They had eaten, bathed, and then, simply, sat down. They had felt no drive to repair systems, no urge to care for the sick or young beyond the most basic immediate gesture, no will to even propagate. The entire population was dying of serene neglect. In their quest to remove humanity's flaws, the Conclave had stripped away the very engine of its survival, the desperate, caring, future-oriented will to live. A Creedar biologician, observing a human child passively staring at a broken water recycler while dying of thirst, experienced what its translation software labeled as a system error in its own psyche. They had not created peace. They had engineered a uniquely horrifying form of mass suicide. The news of Proxima's fate did not break human morale. It shattered any last illusion of possible surrender. If the choice was between extinction and becoming that, then extinction would be chosen, but not before taking the Conclave with them. A grim, unified purpose now coalesced from the chaos. The noise across the stars changed. The music and defiance remained, but now it was layered with data packages, schematics, weapons designs, and a single, brutal strategic doctrine called the Broken Mirror. The doctrine was simple: humanity could not match Conclave technology. So, it would force the Conclave to face itself. Using every scrap of stolen data, human cryptographers and psychologists had done the impossible. They had hacked the Conclave's social psyche. They identified the ancient, hidden fractures, the Vel's obsessive fear of imperfection, the Lumine's pathological need for order in energy patterns, the deep, philosophical schism between the Creedar's pure logic and the 19's hive instinct, the Gruul's silent contempt for all who were not of their cold, watery worlds. Human operatives, using captured ships and rebuilt drones, began a campaign not of direct attack, but of psychological and cultural sabotage. A Vel monument world received a broadcast of perfectly replicated Vel art, with a single, impossible flaw inserted, triggering a species-wide crisis of faith. A Lumine energy harvesting nexus was fed a pattern of chaotic music that caused its stabilizing systems to resonate into destructive feedback. The humans were no longer fighting a war of missiles. They were fighting a war of memes, of philosophical viruses, of tailored lies that preyed on the very foundations of their enemies' civilizations. The Conclave had sought to silence humanity's noise. In response, humanity learned to speak the Conclave's own deepest, most secret fears and broadcast them on a galactic scale. Part 4: The Galactic Conclave began to unravel from the inside. Humanity's Broken Mirror campaign did not destroy ships or planets, it eroded trust, amplified ancient paranoias, and turned allies into suspects. A Vel fleet, convinced a perfect human-made flaw in their flagship's design was the work of Creedar sabotage, opened fire on a Creedar reconnaissance armada. The Lumine, driven to near catatonic distress by the chaotic harmonics infecting their networks, withdrew from the war effort entirely, sealing their borders. The XIX hive mind, infected with a human-crafted logic paradox virus, experienced a schism, with entire brood clusters turning on each other in a silent, horrific civil war. The Gruul simply watched, their amphibian faces unreadable, and began quietly recalling their fleets. The Conclave's war room, once a place of serene certainty, was now a cacophony of accusation and fear. The humans were no longer a target on a map, they were a ghost in the machine, a corrosive idea. In their desperation, the Conclave leadership made a fatal decision. They would abandon finesse. They would deploy the Galaxy Cleansing Protocol, a weapon of last resort from a bygone age, a gravitational singularity generator that could reduce an entire star system to a neat, contained knot of spacetime. They would target Earth. The birthplace of the human infection would be surgically removed from reality. It was an admission of defeat in everything but name, a tantrum of ultimate power. Humanity's scattered remnants detected the massive energy buildup from the Conclave's secret weapon, the Omni-Wrath, as it moved into position at the edge of the Sol system. There were no fleets left to stop it. The GDF was ashes. The orbital defenses were dust. But the noise from Earth grew louder, more focused. It was not a plea. It was an invitation. A single, clear, unencrypted transmission, broadcast on all frequencies, directed at the Omni-Wrath and the watching galaxy. You came to teach us about power. Now witness its true face. You think we hid our best weapons? We are our best weapon. You targeted our unity and found chaos. Now target our chaos and find unity. Fire if you dare. Inside the Omni-Wrath, the Conclave commanders, a mix of Vel and Creedar, hesitated. The transmission was a blatant trick, a bluff. But the humans had done the impossible at every turn. Sensors showed a massive, impossible energy spike not from a weapon, but from the planet itself, from thousands of points, coordinated perfectly despite the stasis web. They were activating something. A shield? A weapon? The Conclave's logic demanded they proceed. The weapon was primed. On Earth, in bunkers and caves and the husks of dead cities, the final act of Protocol Stonewall was executed. It was not a military plan. It was a scientific, philosophical, and sheer bloody-minded gambit. Every remaining power source on the planet, geothermal taps, nuclear piles, orbital solar mirrors redirected to the surface, even the kinetic energy of dammed rivers, was fed into a global network of crude but precisely aligned gravitational projectors. Their target was not the Omni-Wrath. It was Earth's own sun. As the Omni-Wrath fired its singularity beam, a lance of twisted spacetime aimed at Earth's core, humanity fired its own. A combined gravitational pulse, a shot of ultimate defiance from a billion throats of machinery, slammed into Sol. For a fraction of a second, the star's equilibrium was disrupted. It burped. A solar flare of unimaginable magnitude, shaped and focused by the gravitational lens of humanity's last scream, erupted from the sun. It was not a laser. It was a wave of pure, star-forged plasma, millions of degrees hot, moving at a significant fraction of light speed. The singularity beam and the solar flare met in the space between Earth and the Omni-Wrath. The laws of physics screamed in protest. The artificial black hole absorbed the leading edge of the starfire, but it was like trying to drink an ocean. It was overwhelmed, saturated, and destabilized. The Omni-Wrath, and the entire Conclave fleet around it, vanished in a flash of light that outshone the sun for a terrifying moment, a new, temporary star born of human will and Conclave folly. When the light faded, Earth was scarred, its atmosphere glowing with auroras of death, its surface scorched by near-miss radiation. Millions more were dead. But it lived. And it was silent. The stasis web, its generators aboard the destroyed Conclave command ship, flickered and died. Across human space, lights began to flicker back on. The silence was broken, not by the noise, but by the simple, clean signal of an open channel. A human voice, raspy with exhaustion and radiation, spoke just 3 words to the listening, shattered galaxy: "We are here." Part 5. The aftermath was not a victory parade. It was a quiet, painful gasp for air in a galaxy suddenly gone still. Earth was a burned but stubborn ember. The colonies were isolated wrecks. But they were free. The noise returned, but its character had changed. The defiance was tempered by a grim, hard-won wisdom. It was now filled with recovery codes, medical schematics, and location signals for survivors. The Galactic Conclave was no more. It had not been destroyed by human weapons, but by its own reflection, held up by human hands. The Vel retreated into their fortress worlds, consumed by internal purges to root out the imperfect. The Lumine drifted in their nebulas, trying to meditate the chaotic echoes out of their souls. The Creedar entered a millennia of intense, silent philosophical debate on the failure of pure logic. The XIX hive mind was permanently fractured, the warring broods now simple, non-spacefaring predators on their homeworld. Only the Gruul remained outwardly functional, and they were the first to break the silence. A single Gruul vessel, unarmed and painted in the colors of truce, entered the Sol system. It did not go to Earth. It went to the asteroid belt, to the largest surviving human station, Sanctuary. The Gruul ambassador, a being of few words, met with the ragged council of human survivors, a former engineer from Mars, a GDF sergeant who had become a warlord of Chicago, a biologist from Proxima who had lost everything. The Gruul did not apologize. It observed. You were assessed as fragile. You were not. You were assessed as chaotic. You are, but your chaos has a pattern we did not perceive, resilience. You were assessed as individualistic. You are, but your individuals can become a unified will with terrifying speed. Our calculations were wrong. The conclave is ended. We propose a new calculation, distance. The Gruul offered no aid, no alliance. They simply acknowledged that humanity existed as a permanent, formidable variable in the galactic equation. They suggested a border, a buffer of empty space between their realms and humanity's. Then, they left. Humanity was alone, in a galaxy that now feared it. But it was not the fear of a predator. It was the fear of a natural force, a volcano, a star, a storm. Unpredictable, unstoppable, and utterly indifferent to the ancient rules of civilizations that thought they had tamed the universe. Centuries later, a new human generation, born among the starship graveyards and regrown forests of Earth, looked up. They built anew, not with the arrogant certainty of the conclave, but with the humble, resilient lessons carved into their bones. Their new ships were not elegant. They were robust, adaptable, and carried the legacy of the noise in their cores, a constant, open stream of data, music, and memory, a warning and a welcome. When the first of these new vessels encountered a younger, struggling species being bullied by a remnant of the old Creedar logisticians, they did not offer a treaty or a lesson. They simply opened a channel and broadcast the raw, unedited historical files from the War of the Broken Mirror. The audio of the humans singing from the Rocky Mountains, the sensor logs of Proxima's silence, the final transmission from Earth before the sun itself was used as a weapon. They showed the galaxy not their power, but their pain, their cost, and their will. The message was clear, not from any government, but from the species itself: we are here. We have paid a price in blood and soul you cannot imagine for the right to be here. We will not be your masters. We will not be your subjects. Stand in our way, and you will learn why the old masters fell. Seek our friendship, and you will find it forged in something stronger than titanium, survived suffering. The galaxy, wary and forever changed, watched. And humanity, scarred, unbroken, and, finally, understood, continued onward, their journey no longer a scramble for a place at the table, but the quiet, firm footsteps of those who had built their own,